What happens when prejudice and power collide at 35,000 feet? On a routine flight from Chicago to San Francisco, a quiet 17-year-old girl named Maya is settling into her first-class seat, a reward for her academic achievements. But for senior flight attendant Karen Miller, something doesn't look right. In her eyes, the young black teenager doesn't belong. A confrontation unfolds. A young girl is humiliated, and a pilot makes a decision he thinks will solve a simple problem. What none of them know is that this isn't just any teenager. She's the daughter of Governor Marcus Washington, and a single text message is about to turn their world upside down. Stay with us for a story of shocking discrimination and the hard karma that followed. The hum of Chicago O'Hare International Airport was a symphony of controlled chaos. Announcements echoed through the cavernous terminals. The wheels of roller bags clicked a rhythmic beat against the polished floors, and the air buzzed with the energy of 1,000 different journeys about to begin. For 17-year-old Maya Washington, it was a symphony of independence. This was her first time flying solo a trip to visit her grandmother in San Francisco, and the entire experience felt like a rite of passage. She wasn't just flying. She was flying first class. It was a surprise gift from her parents, a reward for finishing her junior year with a 4.0 GPA and winning the state debate championship. Her father, Governor Marcus Washington, had always taught her that rewards were to be earned, not given, and this felt like the ultimate validation of her hard work. He had booked the ticket under her name, Maya C. Washington, wanting her to have the full experience without any of the complications or fuss that often came with his title. Clutching her boarding pass for Trans-American Airlines Flight 482, Seat 2A, Maya felt a flutter of excitement. After a smooth check-in and a surprisingly quick pass through security, she found her gate and sat down with a worn paperback copy of The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. She was a thoughtful and observant young woman, possessing a quiet maturity that often made people guess she was older than she was. Her hair was styled in neat box braids that fell just past her shoulders, and she was dressed comfortably for the long flight in a simple grey sweatshirt, black leggings, and a pair of clean white sneakers. She looked like any other teenager, indistinguishable from the crowd, and she cherished that anonymity. When the boarding call for first-class passengers was announced, she joined the short line, her backpack slung over one shoulder. The gate agent, a cheerful man with a kind smile, scanned her ticket. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Washington. Enjoy your flight." "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft but clear. Stepping onto the plane, she was greeted at the door by a flight attendant who offered a perfunctory smile. Maya navigated the aisle into the exclusive quiet of the first-class cabin. It was even nicer than she had imagined. The seats were like individual cocoons of dark grey leather, spacious and gleaming under the soft cabin lights. She found 2A a window seat and slid into it, the supple leather cool against her skin. It felt incredible. She stowed her backpack under the seat in front of her and buckled in her eyes, drawn to the fascinating ballet of ground crew vehicles moving on the tarmac outside her window. A few minutes later, a senior flight attendant with blonde hair pulled into a tight, severe bun, and a name tag that read Karen approached her. Karen Miller had been flying for over 20 years, and in her mind, the first-class cabin was her domain. She surveyed her passengers with a practiced eye, sorting and categorizing them in an instant. When her eyes landed on Maya, she paused for a fraction of a second too long. Her smile, which had been bright for the middle-aged man in 1C, tightened almost imperceptibly. "Can I get you something to drink before we take off? We have orange juice water or champagne," she asked, her tone clipped. "Orange juice would be great. Thank you," Maya said politely. Karen returned a moment later. While she poured the juice for the other passengers into heavy-based glass tumblers, she handed Maya a thin, clear plastic cup. It was a small thing, almost too small to notice. But Maya noticed. She saw the man across the aisle, who was younger than her father, receive his drink in a real glass. She felt a familiar, unwelcome pang in her chest, a feeling she had been taught to recognize, but had hoped to escape today. Was it an oversight, or was it a message? She chose to believe it was an oversight, a simple mistake. Pushing the thought aside, she took a sip from the plastic cup and returned to her book, determined to enjoy the luxury she had so rightfully earned. The calm, however, was destined to be short-lived. The boarding process was nearly complete. The first-class cabin had filled with the quiet rustle of newspapers, the soft clicks of laptops opening, and the low murmur of conversation. Maya was deeply engrossed in her book when a shadow fell over her page. She looked up to see a man standing in the aisle, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her laptop. He was in his late 50s, with slicked-back grey hair and an air of impatient importance. He held a boarding pass in his hand, and he was staring down at her seat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I think you're in my seat." Maya blinked, momentarily confused. "I'm sorry, I think there must be a mistake. My boarding pass is for 2A. The man, whose name was Arthur Henderson, scoffed as if her response was a personal affront. "That's impossible. I am a Platinum Elite member with this airline. I always sit in 2A. Check your ticket again, young lady." Instead of getting flustered, Maya calmly reached into her backpack, retrieved her ticket jacket, and presented the boarding pass. The letters and numbers were clear. Seat 2A, Washington, Maya C. She held it up for him to see. "See seat 2A." Mr. Henderson barely glanced at it. He was not a man accustomed to being contradicted, especially by a teenager. He waved his hand dismissively and immediately looked around for assistance, his eyes locking onto Karen Miller, who was approaching with a tray of empty glasses. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice loud enough to turn a few heads. "There appears to be a problem. This person is in my seat, and she's refusing to move." The word person was loaded with disdain. Karen rushed over her expression, immediately shifting to one of solicitous concern for the businessman. She placed herself between him and Maya, creating a physical barrier that already defined who she saw as the customer and who she saw as the problem. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me handle this," she said to Mr. Henderson, offering him a placating smile. Then she turned to Maya, and the smile vanished, replaced by a look of strained patience. "Honey, can I see your boarding pass?" The use of the word honey was like a needle prick. It was patronizing, designed to infantilize her. Maya handed over her boarding pass, her calm demeanor still intact, though a knot of anxiety was beginning to tighten in her stomach. Karen took the pass and gave it a cursory glance. She then looked at Mr. Henderson's ticket. "Oh, I see," she said, tapping her chin thoughtfully, as if solving a complex puzzle. "It seems we have a double booking situation. The system must have had a glitch." She never once considered that Mr. Henderson might be the one in error. Her assumption was immediate and unshakable. Sometimes when a seat is reassigned at the last minute for one of our premier flyers. She began directing her explanation more to the cabin than to Maya. The system doesn't update properly for the other passenger's ticket. The implication was clear. Mr. Henderson was the premier flyer, and Maya was the other passenger. "Well, it needs to be fixed," Mr. Henderson grumbled, checking his gold watch. "I have a board meeting to prepare for." Karen nodded sympathetically. "Of course, sir." She turned back to Maya, her professional mask now fully in place. "I am so sorry for the inconvenience, but I'm going to have to ask you to move. We have a very nice seat for you in Economy Plus." Maya felt a surge of disbelief. "But my ticket is for this seat. I booked it weeks ago. Perhaps you could check his ticket again. Maybe his seat is 3A. Karen's eyes narrowed. The quiet, polite girl was pushing back, and Karen didn't like it. "I've already looked at the manifest, and there's been a mistake with your assignment. The system has prioritized Mr. Henderson for this seat. It's just a computer error, but I need you to cooperate so we can get this flight off the ground." It was a masterful piece of corporate doublespeak, designed to sound official, while placing all the blame and responsibility on Maya. But Maya knew it was a lie. There was no glitch. There was only a choice being made, and she was on the losing end of it. "No," Maya said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a gavel in the hushed cabin. "I'm not moving. This is my assigned seat. I have the boarding pass to prove it, and I haven't done anything wrong." Karen Miller's face hardened. The facade of customer service politeness evaporated, revealing a raw, undisguised frustration. "Miss, I don't think you understand," she said, her voice dropping to a low, threatening hiss. "You are preventing this aircraft from departing on time. That is a serious issue. Now I am not asking you. I am telling you. You need to gather your things and move to the seat I've assigned for you." Mr. Henderson crossed his arms, a smug look on his face. "Just listen to her, kid. Don't make this a bigger deal than it needs to be. Some of us have important things to do." The injustice of it all was suffocating. Maya's heart was pounding now, a frantic drum against her ribs. She could feel the eyes of the other first-class passengers on her. Some looked away uncomfortable. Others watched with undisguised curiosity, as if she were a piece of live entertainment. The whispers started quiet but cutting. What is her problem? Just move already. Why is she even up here in the first place? Each whispered comment was a small cut. They didn't know her story. They didn't know about the straight A's, the debate trophies, the hours she'd spent studying to earn this very seat. They saw a young black girl in a sweatshirt and leggings and drew their own conclusions, the same ones Karen and Mr. Henderson had already drawn. Just then, a woman seated in 2C across the aisle leaned forward. She was in her 40s with kind eyes and a concerned expression. Her name was Sarah Jenkins, a university professor on her way to a conference. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm, directed at Karen. "I was here when this young lady boarded. She was one of the first ones on. She has a valid ticket for that seat. I saw it. It seems highly irregular to move her for someone who arrived later." "Are you absolutely certain you can't find another seat for this gentleman?" Karen shot Sarah a venomous glare. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is an airline matter. Please stay out of it. It's a matter of basic decency," Sarah retorted, her voice rising slightly. Karen ignored her, turning her full attention back to Maya. The challenge from another passenger had only solidified her resolve. This was now a matter of authority. "This is your final chance," Karen said, her voice cold as ice. "If you do not cooperate, I will be forced to call the captain. And if he has to come out here, I can guarantee you he will not be as patient as I have been. We will have you and your belongings removed from this flight for failure to comply with a crew member's instructions." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Being removed from the flight, the humiliation was almost too much to bear. Tears pricked at the corners of Maya's eyes, hot and angry. She fought them back, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being treated like a criminal. Her father had always taught her to stand up for herself, to fight for what was right. But he had also taught her to pick her battles, and surrounded by hostile faces, under the fluorescent glare of the cabin lights, she felt utterly alone and powerless. She looked from Karen's unforgiving face to Mr. Henderson's dismissive smirk. She saw the other passengers staring, judging. In that moment, the beautiful leather seat, the symbol of her achievement, felt like a trap. The joy and excitement she had felt just minutes before had curdled into a sickening mixture of shame, anger, and fear. Her battle was lost before it had even truly begun. The standoff couldn't last. With a crisp, decisive nod, Karen turned and walked toward the front of the plane, disappearing behind the curtain that led to the galley and the cockpit. A palpable tension settled over the first-class cabin. Mr. Henderson let out an exaggerated sigh and began tapping his foot impatiently. Sarah Jenkins gave Maya a look of deep sympathy, mouthing the words, "I'm so sorry." A minute later, Karen returned, followed by a man with silvering temples and a uniform adorned with 4 gold stripes on the epaulets. This was Captain Robert Davies. He had been flying for nearly 3 decades, and his pre-flight routine was a sacred ritual of checklists and technical briefings. Being called out to the cabin to handle a passenger dispute was an unwelcome and irritating distraction. Karen had already given him her heavily biased version of the story. "Captain, I'm so sorry to bother you, but we have a passenger who is being non-compliant. There was a seat duplication error, and she is refusing to move from a Platinum Elite member's assigned seat. She's holding up our departure." Captain Davies walked into the cabin with the weight of that narrative already shaping his perception. He saw what Karen wanted him to see, a frustrated high-value customer, Mr. Lewa Henderson, and a defiant teenager who was causing a problem. His priority was simple: resolve the issue and get the plane in the air. Flight schedules were tight, and delays cost the airline money and reputation. He stopped in the aisle, his presence commanding immediate attention. He didn't look at Maya's boarding pass. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He addressed her with an air of paternalistic authority, his voice calm but brooking no argument. "Good morning, miss," he began. "I'm Captain Davies. I understand there's been some confusion with your seat." "There's no confusion," Maya said, her voice trembling slightly but holding firm. "This is my seat. I have my ticket." The captain held up a hand to stop her. "I've already been briefed by my head purser. There was a system glitch. It's unfortunate, but it happens. What matters now is that we need to get this flight moving. We have 180 other passengers who would like to get to San Francisco on time." He was framing her as the obstacle, the selfish individual holding everyone else up. It was a classic tactic of isolating a target to force compliance. "We have arranged another seat for you," he continued. "And as an apology for the mix-up, Transamerican Airlines would be happy to offer you a $300 travel voucher for a future flight. I think that's more than fair." He said it as if he were closing a business deal, not addressing a humiliated young woman. The voucher felt like an insult, a cheap payoff for her dignity. Maya looked at his face, searching for a hint of impartiality, of fairness, but found only impatience. He was an authority figure, the ultimate power on this aircraft, and he had already passed his judgment. To argue further would be futile. It would only escalate the situation, validating Karen's claim that she was non-compliant. The threat of being removed from the plane still echoed in her ears. Defeated, she finally gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The fight went out of her, replaced by a cold, hollow resignation. "Fine," she whispered. "Excellent," Captain Davies said with a relieved smile, as if she had finally seen reason. "Thank you for your cooperation." He gave a crisp nod to Karen, and then retreated back to the sanctum of the cockpit, his problem solved. Karen Miller's face was a mask of triumph. "Thank you," she said to Maya, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Now, if you'll just gather your things." With slow, deliberate movements, Maya pulled her backpack out from under the seat. She stood up her small frame, feeling incredibly vulnerable in the wide aisle. She refused to look at Mr. Henderson as he slid past her into the seat she had just vacated, settling in with a satisfied grunt. She clutched her book and her backpack to her chest like a shield and began the long, mortifying walk back through the business-class cabin, past the curtain, and into the narrower, more crowded aisles of economy. Every pair of eyes she passed felt like a physical blow. The walk of shame, as she would later call it, was the most profoundly embarrassing moment of her young life. She finally found her new seat to be a middle seat in an economy plus row, squeezed between a man who was already asleep and a woman who had spread her belongings across the empty space. It was a world away from 2A. And as she sank into the less comfortable seat, a single hot tear finally escaped and traced a silent path down her cheek. The plane finally pushed back from the gate, the engines whining to life. But as it taxied toward the runway, the captain's voice came over the intercom, not with the usual cheerful welcome, but with an announcement of a further delay. "Folks, this is your captain speaking. We have a minor mechanical indication on one of our sensors. Ground maintenance is going to take a look. It should only be about a 20-minute delay, but we are required to hold our position here on the tarmac. We'll keep you updated. Apologies for the inconvenience." For most passengers, it was an annoyance. For Maya Washington, sitting in her cramped middle seat, it was a small, ironic grace period. The raw sting of her humiliation was still fresh, and the frustration was bubbling inside her. She felt powerless and invisible. She pulled out her phone, knowing she should wait until they were in the air to use it. But she needed to talk to someone. She needed to tell her dad. She wasn't texting him as the daughter of a governor seeking retribution. She was texting as a heartbroken teenage girl who had been wronged and just wanted her father's comfort. Her thumbs flew across the screen. "Hey, Dad. Flight is delayed on the tarmac. Also, something really awful just happened. They made me move out of my first-class seat. A flight attendant and the pilot forced me to give it to some rude man and moved me to economy. It was so embarrassing." Everyone stared at me. She hit send, not expecting an immediate reply. Her father was Governor Marcus Washington. His days were a relentless series of meetings, press conferences, and policy decisions. He was likely in the middle of something important. But Governor Washington had a rule. When his daughter's name flashed on his screen, he always looked. He was in a budget meeting with his senior staff, a dry and contentious affair, when his phone buzzed. He glanced down, saw Maya, and his focus immediately shifted. He read her text once, then a second time. The other people in the room faded into the background. The budget charts and fiscal reports on the table became meaningless. A cold, quiet fury, far more potent than any loud outburst, settled over him. His daughter, his brilliant, hard-working, kind daughter, had been humiliated. The tone of her text, the pain laced between the words, was unmistakable. He knew the subtext. He knew that a well-dressed, middle-aged white girl would likely not have been treated the same way. This wasn't about a seat on a plane. It was about dignity. Without a word, he stood up and walked out of the meeting, leaving his bewildered staff in silence. In the hallway, he didn't call the airline's 1-800 customer service number. He didn't fire off an angry tweet. Governor Washington was a man who understood the architecture of power. He made one call to his chief of staff, a sharp and efficient man named Thomas Reed. "Tom," the governor said, his voice dangerously calm, "cancel my next 2 hours. I have a priority issue. My daughter Maya is on Trans-American Flight 482 at O'Hare, scheduled to depart for San Francisco. I want you to get Mark O'Connell on the phone for me. Now." Mark O'Connell was the chief executive officer of Trans-American Airlines. Thomas Reed, knowing the governor's tone, didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Yes, sir. Right away." 5 minutes later, Mark O'Connell, sitting in his lavish corporate headquarters, was interrupted by his executive assistant. "Sir, I have Governor Marcus Washington on the line. She says it's urgent." O'Connell, surprised, took the call. "Governor, an unexpected pleasure. What can I do for you?" "Mark." The governor's voice was like steel. "My daughter is on your flight, TA-4822. She is currently sitting on the tarmac at O'Hare. I have just been informed that your crew, including the captain, has forced her out of her paid, ticketed first-class seat and moved her to the back of the plane. I want a full and complete explanation for why my child was singled out and humiliated. And I want that explanation before that plane's wheels leave the ground." A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through Mark O'Connell. This was not a complaint. This was a crisis. A governor's daughter, humiliated, on one of his planes. The potential for a public relations cataclysm was immense. Governor, I am speechless. I had no idea. Please allow me a few moments. I will get to the bottom of this personally. I give you my word that plane is not going anywhere until I do." The call ended. Mark O'Connell immediately slammed the button on his intercom. "Get me David Chen in operations now, and get me the flight manifest for TA-482 from O'Hare to SFO." The panic had begun. A single text message had bypassed the entire customer service apparatus and lit a fire at the very top of the corporate pyramid. And down that pyramid, the flames were about to start racing toward an unsuspecting flight crew. The message from the top of Trans-American Airlines' corporate structure cascaded downwards with the speed and force of an avalanche. CEO Mark O'Connell's call to David Chen, the Vice President of Operations, was short, brutal, and left no room for error. Chen, a man whose career was built on keeping the airline's thousands of daily flights running smoothly, felt a cold dread creep up his spine. This was the kind of incident that ended careers. Immediately after hanging up with the CEO, Chen was on a direct line to the operations tower at O'Hare. "This is David Chen. I want an immediate ground hold on Trans-American 482 to San Francisco. No fail order. Do not let that aircraft move. Patch me through to the flight deck on a priority channel." On board TA-482, Captain Robert Davies was feeling smug. The maintenance check had cleared the sensor fault. It was a minor glitch, as he'd suspected. He was about to contact the tower to request clearance for takeoff when his radio crackled to life with an urgency that instantly put him on high alert. "Trans-American 482. This is O'Hare Ground Control. You are to hold your position. I repeat, hold your position. Stand by for a priority patch from airline operations." Captain Davies exchanged a confused look with his first officer. A direct patch from corporate ops while they were on the tarmac. That was highly unusual. A moment later, a new voice filled his headset, sharp and stressed. It was David Chen. "Captain Davies, this is VP David Chen. Confirm your identity." "This is Captain Davies. What's going on, David?" "Confirm for me." Captain Chen's voice was razor-thin. "Did you or your crew move a passenger from seat 2A to an economy seat prior to departure?" Davies felt a jolt of alarm. How could corporate possibly know about that already? And why would a VP care about a routine seat duplication? "Yes, we had a minor seating issue," he said, trying to sound confident. "It was a double booking. The situation has been resolved." "Resolved?" Chen's voice was incredulous, laced with something that sounded like panic. "Captain, was the passenger you moved a Miss Maya C. Washington?" Captain Davies's blood ran cold. The name on the manifest. He hadn't paid it any mind. "Yes, I believe that was her name. A teenage girl." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Davies could almost hear the corporate executive taking a breath to steady himself before delivering the payload. "Captain?" "Robert." Chen said, his voice dropping to a deadly serious tone. "The passenger you moved, the teenage girl you forced out of her seat, is Maya Washington. As in the only daughter of Governor Marcus Washington. The governor just got off the phone with our CEO. He is, to put it mildly, demanding an explanation for why his daughter was publicly humiliated by your crew." The world inside the cockpit seemed to tilt on its axis. Captain Davies stared blankly at the instrument panel, the glowing lights and numbers blurring before his eyes. Governor Washington. He replayed the entire scene in his mind, Karen's biased report, his own dismissive attitude, the look on the young girl's face as she walked back down the aisle. He hadn't seen a person. He'd seen a problem to be solved quickly. And in his haste, he had made a catastrophic, career-ending error. His first officer, who had heard the entire exchange, swore under his breath, his eyes wide with shock. "Robert, are you still there?" Chen's voice crackled in his ear. "Yes. Yes, I'm here." Davies stammered, his mind racing. "Here are your instructions, and they are not negotiable," Chen commanded. "You and the flight attendant involved will go to Miss Washington's seat immediately. You will apologize to her in the most sincere and profound way you know how. You will offer her seat back along with any other accommodation she desires. You will treat her like royalty. Is that understood?" "Understood," Davies croaked, his throat dry. "This entire flight and potentially your job depends on how you handle the next 10 minutes. Do not fail." The line went dead. For a long moment, Captain Davies just sat there, the weight of his blunder crushing him. He unbuckled his seatbelt, his movements stiff and robotic. He looked at his first officer. "You have the con." He pushed open the cockpit door and stepped into the galley where Karen Miller was preparing the beverage cart, a smug smile still lingering on her face. "Karen," he said, his voice grim. "With me. Now." Her smile faded at the sight of his ashen face and the sheer terror in his eyes. "What is it?" "Captain, what's wrong? The girl," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The girl we moved from 2A. Do you know who she is?" Karen looked at him confused. "Some teenager who... She's Governor Washington's daughter. He cut her off. And her father just called our CEO. We have a very, very big problem." The color drained from Karen's face. In that instant, she saw her 20-year career, her pension, her entire professional life flash before her eyes. The smug satisfaction she had felt was replaced by a wave of pure, sickening panic. The journey from the front galley to seat 24B was the longest walk of Captain Davies's life. With Karen Miller trailing behind him like a ghost, he moved down the aisle, acutely aware of the curious stares of the passengers. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. Everyone knew something was wrong. They found Maya by the window, or rather squeezed in the middle seat. She had her book open on her lap, but wasn't reading. She was just staring at the page, her expression withdrawn. She looked up as the two uniforms came to a stop beside her row, her eyes showing a flash of apprehension. Did they have a new complaint? Were they going to blame her for the delay, to the utter astonishment of Maya and the surrounding passengers? Captain Davies did something unthinkable. He knelt in the narrow aisle, bringing himself down to her eye level. The posture of supplication was a stark contrast to the towering authority figure he had been just 30 minutes earlier. "Ms. Washington." He began, his voice strained and filled with a desperate sincerity that was impossible to fake. "I have come to offer you my deepest, most profound apology. There has been a terrible, inexcusable error. What happened earlier, there is no excuse for it. I failed to assess the situation properly, and I allowed you to be treated with profound disrespect. It was a failure of my command and my judgment, and I am truly, deeply sorry." Karen, standing awkwardly behind him, looked pale and shaken. She mumbled her own apology, her voice barely audible. "Yes, miss, I am so sorry. It was a misunderstanding. I apologize." Her words were hollow, a frantic recitation of a script she'd been ordered to deliver. Maya looked from the captain's pleading eyes to Karen's terrified face. She understood instantly what had happened. They hadn't come to this realization on their own. They hadn't suddenly developed a conscience. Someone had called, her dad. The knowledge brought a strange mix of vindication and renewed anger. They weren't apologizing to her, Maya, the 17-year-old girl they had belittled. They were apologizing to the governor's daughter. "Please, Miss Washington." The captain continued, his voice dropping lower. "Allow us to escort you back to your seat in first class. Seat 2A is waiting for you. We will have Mr. Henderson moved. We will get you anything you want. Please just allow us to correct our mistake." This was her moment. The power in the cabin had completely inverted. All eyes were on her. She could accept. She could walk back to the front of the plane, reclaim her seat, and savor the victory. She could watch as Mr. Henderson was forced to move a satisfying taste of poetic justice. But as she looked at their panicked faces, she realized that returning to that seat now would mean accepting their terms. It would mean that her worth was conditional, dependent on her father's name. The apology was a lie, a desperate act of damage control. Her dignity wasn't something they could take and then return with a voucher and a frightened apology. She took a slow, deliberate breath, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, imbued with a strength that belied her years. "No, thank you, Captain." The two words fell into a stunned silence. Captain Davies stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. "Ms. Washington, please, I insist." "You insisted before," Maya said, her gaze unwavering. "You and Ms. Miller made it very clear where you think I belong. You drew your conclusions about me and you acted on them. An apology now only because you found out who my father is doesn't change that. It just confirms it." She paused, letting her words sink in. "So, no. I won't be moving. I'm fine right here." Her refusal was not petulant or angry. It was a quiet, powerful act of self-respect. It was more damning than any tirade she could have possibly delivered. It told them that their panic-stricken offer was worthless because the principle behind it was rotten. By staying in the economy plus seat, she held up a mirror to their prejudice, and the reflection was ugly and undeniable. Utterly defeated, Captain Davies slowly rose to his feet. There was nothing more he could say. He had offered his apology, and it had been rejected, not out of spite, but on principle. He and Karen exchanged a look of pure despair and turned, making the slow, silent walk back to the front of the plane, the weight of their careers settling upon them like a shroud. In seat 2A, Arthur Henderson, having overheard the captain say the name Washington, Alauasosquos, was beginning to sweat profusely. The quiet teenager he had helped displace was suddenly the most powerful person on the plane. The rest of the flight to San Francisco passed in a thick, suffocating tension. The first-class cabin was silent, the usual clinking of glasses and cheerful chatter replaced by an uneasy quiet. Mr. Henderson sat stiffly in seat 2A, not daring to ask for a drink or make eye contact with the crew. Karen Miller performed her duties with robotic precision, her face a pale, emotionless mask. Captain Davies made only the most necessary announcements from the cockpit, his voice flat and devoid of its earlier confident charm. When the plane finally touched down at SFO and taxied to the gate, the fasten seatbelt sign had barely pinged off when a new voice came over the intercom, not the captain's but a flight attendant from the back. Would Ms. Maya Washington please remain in her seat? All other passengers may deplane as usual. As the passengers filed out, many of them cast curious glances at Maya, who sat patiently, her book once again in her lap. When the plane was nearly empty, a man in a sharp suit from the airline's corporate office appeared at her row. This was David Chen, the VP of Operations, who had flown in on a private jet from Dallas for the sole purpose of managing this disaster personally. "Ms. Washington," he said, his voice respectful. "I'm David Chen from Transamerican. I am here to personally apologize on behalf of the entire airline. Your father is waiting for you at the jet bridge." Maya nodded and gathered her things. As she was escorted to the front of the plane, she passed the flight crew, who were lined up by the cockpit door. Captain Davies and Karen Miller stood there, their faces drawn and grim. They looked at her not as a teenager, but as the harbinger of their professional doom. Maya met their gaze, held it for a moment, and then walked past without a word. At the end of the jet bridge stood her father. Governor Marcus Washington wasn't flanked by a massive security team or a press corps. He stood alone, his expression a mixture of relief and paternal anger. He enveloped Maya in a powerful hug, holding her for a long moment. "Are you okay, baby girl?" he murmured. "I'm okay, Dad," she whispered back. Only then did the governor turn his attention to David Chen, who was waiting nearby, wringing his hands. The governor's voice was low and controlled, but it carried the unmistakable weight of his office. "Mr. Chen," he began, "let me be perfectly clear. This is not about my daughter getting special treatment because of who I am. I am here because a 17-year-old child who was a paying customer was singled out, intimidated, and publicly humiliated by your staff based on nothing more than their own prejudices. This is about a corporate culture that allows an employee to decide based on appearance who does and does not belong. The consequences were as swift as they were severe. Transamerican Airlines launched an immediate and highly public internal investigation. For Karen Miller, the end came quickly. The investigation unearthed a string of prior passenger complaints, citing her rude and discriminatory behavior, complaints that had been previously dismissed by middle management. Faced with irrefutable evidence and pressure from the highest levels, the airline terminated her employment for gross misconduct. Her 2 decades of service ended with her being escorted from the building with a box of her personal belongings. For Captain Robert Davies, the fallout was just as damaging. While he wasn't fired outright, he was suspended without pay for 6 months. He was ordered to attend mandatory and intensive training courses on de-escalation, conflict resolution, and implicit bias. The incident was permanently noted in his service record, effectively killing any chance he had of career advancement. He would forever be known as the captain who chose to trust a biased subordinate over a quiet teenager, a mistake that would follow him until his retirement. For Arthur Henderson, the karma was more subtle, but no less potent. His company was a major corporate client for Transamerican. The governor's office made no public statements, but in the world of corporate and political power, silence can be deafening. Word of Mr. Henderson's behavior spread. His CEO, terrified of losing lucrative state contracts and facing a PR nightmare, issued a formal apology to the governor's office. Mr. Henderson was stripped of a major promotion he had been expecting. His travel privileges were severely curtailed, and his elite status with the airline was permanently revoked. He became a pariah in his own company, a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance. The airline itself undertook a massive, expensive overhaul of its customer service training programs, instituting a new, Dignity for All initiative. They issued a formal public apology, and at the governor's insistence, donated a substantial sum to a non-profit organization dedicated to advancing civil rights and educational opportunities for underprivileged youth. Maya Washington never flew first class again. The experience had tainted the luxury, but she carried the lesson with her that sometimes the most powerful stand you can take is not to demand your seat back, but to refuse it on principle, proving that your dignity can never be taken, no matter where you are forced to sit. 4 years later, the echoes of Flight 482 had not faded. They had transformed. Maya Washington was no longer a high school student, but a poised and articulate political science major at Stanford University. The incident on the plane had become a defining moment in her life, a painful catalyst that had forged her future path. The humiliation she felt that day had been replanted into a fierce determination to advocate for those who were not the governor's daughter, for those whose stories of everyday prejudice were dismissed or ignored. She stood at a podium in a crowded university auditorium, the light catching the silver necklace around her neck. She was the keynote speaker for a student-led conference on social justice. "Dignity is not a privilege of the powerful," she said, her voice resonating with a conviction that captivated the room. "It is the fundamental right of every individual. It cannot be granted by a flight attendant, a pilot, or even a CEO. It can only be recognized or violated." That day I learned that the most powerful response to a violation of your dignity is not anger, but a calm and unyielding refusal to accept a reality that is built on someone else's prejudice. Her story, which she had written about in an article for the university's law journal, had become a widely cited example in ethics and corporate training seminars. She had never named the airline or the individuals involved, believing that the power of the story was in its universal message, not in personal retribution. The lives of those who had violated her dignity had taken drastically different turns. Karen Miller never worked in the airline industry again. Blacklisted and with a reputation that preceded her, she found herself unemployable in any customer-facing role that required authority or trust. After months of failed interviews, she took a job at a regional distribution warehouse, packing boxes on the night shift. The crisp uniform and sense of command were replaced by a fluorescent safety vest and the monotonous drone of machinery. Her days of patrolling the first-class cabin of holding power over strangers were a distant memory, replaced by the anonymity of a life lived in the shadows of a profound and public mistake. Captain Robert Davies did return to the cockpit, but his career was irrevocably altered. He was a senior pilot with a permanent black mark on his record. He was consistently passed over for promotions and was often assigned less desirable transatlantic cargo routes, long, lonely flights across dark oceans with no passengers to command. The captain's authority he once wielded so carelessly was now a constant heavy reminder of his failure. In his quieter moments, staring out at the endless expanse of clouds, he would replay the scene in the cabin, but now he saw not a problem, but the face of a young girl, calm and resolute, whose quiet no had taught him more about integrity than his 30 years of flying. Arthur Henderson's fall was one of quiet professional disgrace. He kept his job, but his wings were clipped. He was moved from his client-facing executive role to a back-office logistics position with no travel and little influence. The arrogance that had once fueled him curdled into a quiet resentment. He had learned the hard way that the world was smaller than he thought, and that the person you dismiss today might hold the key to your future tomorrow. On the other side of the country, Maya finished her speech to a standing ovation. After the event, she saw a familiar face in the crowd. It was Sarah Jenkins, the professor from across the aisle on that flight. The two had stayed in touch with Sarah, becoming a mentor and a friend. "You were incredible, Maya," Sarah said, embracing her. "You've turned such an ugly experience into something that can truly change things." Maya smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "It changed me," she admitted. "For a long time, I just felt shame. Now I see it was never my shame to carry." Looking out at the students who were now discussing her speech with passion and energy, Maya understood the true nature of the outcome. The karma wasn't just in the downfall of those who had wronged her. The real, lasting victory was in her own rise, in finding her voice, defining her purpose, and ensuring that the echoes of that day would serve as a lesson in dignity for years to come. This story is a stark and powerful reminder that prejudice doesn't just exist in history books. It lives in the snap judgments and quiet assumptions people make every day. Maya Washington's ordeal at 35,000 feet wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was a battle for respect. Her quiet refusal to accept a panicked, self-serving apology was a profound act of strength. It demonstrated that true character isn't defined by status or power, but by the dignity you hold on to when others try to strip it away. The consequences faced by the crew and the arrogant passenger serve as a potent example of karma, proving that our actions, especially those born from bias, will eventually find their way back to us. If Maya's story of quiet courage resonated with you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with others to spread the message that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories where justice prevails. What would you have done in Maya's situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.